I'm Dr. Carl, coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first Australians and traditional custodians of the lands where we live, learn and work. G'day, Dr. Carl, Shirtlows of Science, University of Sydney. Today I'm very lucky to have Dr. Anne Jones. Okay, Anne Jones, but everybody gets called doctor to make him feel relaxed. Welcome to the microphone, Dr. Anne.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you've had a podcast, or you have a podcast, What the Duck? And then also, Sex is Weird?
Yeah. We've had a series recently, and I've wanted to make this series for years and years. In fact, I pitched it at the ABC several times, and no one was willing to go there with me. So I thought, well, bugger it. I'll do it myself. So I have. And we did about 6 episodes of Sex is Weird.
It is weird. And by the way, in my case, having been trained as a medical doctor, I find it weird that there's a certain part of the body between the belly button and the knees that is kind of a little bit off limits. And there's also something weird in our society that you can show on TV, people killing each other with guns, but not loving each other very much in a special way. Any comments, please, Dr. Ab, before we dive into this?
You hit the nail on the head with that, because the reaction to this has been a bit different. I've been getting reactions like people writing and saying, oh, why are you so obsessed with sex? You know, it's just unhealthy, the amount of sex that you talk about. And I think to myself, actually, almost everything around us in the world, almost everything is a product of sex and sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is a core concept for biology. You need to understand it and understand sexual evolution to really understand the world that we live in. And the variation of it, the way that it's evolved, you know, innies and outies, think about it like it's a docking station. It's really odd. Like, how does that evolve over time? I've just been fascinated by all of this and all of the different variations in sexual reproduction across the natural world. And quite frankly, I could have been making programs about this until the end of my career, but we stopped at about like 7 with a couple of bonuses.
Wow. And it is weird with that comment of why are you obsessed with this? Because after all, it's not just terrorists and murderers that have sex. Regular people do it too. Yeah. We've got so much to talk about now. History of sex, the penis, how it's out there, females, attraction, pleasure, virgin births, do we need sex? Now, you mentioned as a starting point, just we have to start somewhere, parthenogenesis, which I'm guess is not giving birth to a large Greek building.
I mean, it'd be amazing if we could do that. But no, parthenogenesis is a way that some creatures can actually circumvent sex. So sex doesn't come without risk when you think about it. Well, there's obviously the disease risk. That's something we're aware of as humans, that you can get sexually transmitted diseases from partners. That is a risk of undertaking sex. But you also have a predation risk. So if you think about it, if you're a prey animal and you're bonking away, completely distracted, perhaps enjoying yourself, having the time of your life, you could get predated. You're very distracted. You're not looking around for a hawk over your shoulder. So sex can be really risky in that way as well. So there's all of these reasons. There's genetic reasons. So you could argue, right, that it's a risk to have a sexual partner to divide your genes with and go halvies in a kid, because you're taking a risk on their genes as well. So you're giving half of their genetic capability, a go. What happens if they're a really bad mate choice, So there's risks in a number of levels. And over the course of evolution, there's been some creatures in the world that have developed sex and then what they call lost sex or discarded it in the course of evolution. And it's incredible to find out about them, and they're not all invertebrates. So people often say, oh, that's just insects or algae that can do that can divide themselves and create parthenoids or clones. But no, there's vertebrates that can do this as well. And there is a gecko in Australia called Binose gecko, and this has full populations that are sexually reproducing, and it has populations which are asexually reproducing and only have females. They are able to clone themselves.
Okay, so this is a gecko?
A gecko.
Wow. And so there's a population where male and female get together and make a baby has different DNA, which has the advantage that because the DNA is different, if the environment changes or a disease comes through, the offspring might survive better. But also, so what's it called? The Bowen
Bynose gecko, Bynoe.
Bino, and then there's an apostrophe S, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and there's also others. There's whiptail lizards in from the Americas, from North America. They have female-only populations as well. And what you say is right. We have this idea that you do need a genetic mixing as a way of creating a stronger population to be able to deal with oncoming threats, be that climate, whatever, right? But another way of looking at that is if there was something like a big bushfire that comes through and there's only one gecko left,
Ah,
she can repopulate the earth because she can clone herself. So there are advantages in certain situations.
yeah. So the advantage of sex is you've got diversity. The advantage of non-sex is that you can populate an area really quickly. I actually came across the whiptail lizard a couple of decades ago, and it blew my mind. They looked at them and they think, okay, they're all female. Maybe they can do the trick that the bees do and store sperm for ages. Maybe there's a male we haven't found. But then you go on to the second, the third, the fourth generation. Mate, ain't no males. Zero.
Mm-hmm. They find that this happens as well. There's this idea about sperm storage that occurs in elasmobranchs. So this is sharks, rays, animals like that, right? They had this idea that there was sperm storage going on. And sperm storage can occur in species. I don't want to completely discount it. But more recently, with genetic testing, they have found that a lot of the rays and sharks that live in aquariums that were thought to have had this sperm storage occur are actually cloning themselves. And there's some cases in Australia. So there is Freckle the ray that was in Sydney Aquarium there, and Freckle started getting a little bit tubby. The keepers were looking at Freckle, and Freckle started to get really shirty because they sort of do some training, right, in where they get them to come up to the surface so that they can check them and things, so this training for health checks. And she didn't want to participate. And she kept on stealing everyone's fish. And she was really hungry all the time. And they put a camera up so that they could observe her, and her tummy kept on growing and growing and growing. And it eventually, the penny dropped. Freckle is pregnant. Now, Freckle is in a tank with about 7 other female rays,
So
no males.
stingrays. So we're talking stingray,
Stingrays.
that triangular creature with a tail hanging out the back, which may or may not have something
Yep.
bad on the end of it. Okay, so she's a ray. Okay, go on. Yep.
And she's never had contact with a male ever. She hangs around in a group of females. And lo and behold, one day, eventually, there was a tiny little baby that popped out of Freckle. She had cloned herself without ever having contact with males. So it happened in Sydney.
Wow. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that were Freckle to have sex with a male stingray, things could go ahead and she could have a baby as well.
Yeah,
So,
so in
wow.
some sharks, they've shown that there can be a flip. Now, there is a shark whose name escapes me that was up in the Townsville Aquarium, and she had had a long relationship with a male. They'd had several sets of offspring that were the genetics of both male and female, but they didn't have enough room to keep on having these tiger sharks, sort of like, or leopard sharks, whatever they were, sort of giving birth, because you've got to put them somewhere. So they separated the male and the female. And after a couple of years, she started laying eggs. And they at first didn't hatch, and then they did. And she started cloning herself.
Wow.
So she flipped from sexual reproduction to parthenogenesis. Now, how much this occurs out there in nature, we still don't know. Like, we'd have to, go through and sort of like test the genetics of every shark or ray that we ever came across to try and figure this out. But maybe it is actually happening out there in response to environmental conditions that we are not yet aware of, and perhaps in species that we're not yet aware of. So I found this to be a real mind blower. And of course, the question that I always got from listeners, I'm sure you've had this before, Carl, in your programs, is what about humans though? Why can't we clone ourselves?
Yes.
And this is a really good question.
Have you found anything in the literature that suggests there may be a minor hint?
Yeah, I did. I found, and I'm sure you've come across things in along this way before. There's like sort of certain tumors that can grow that have in a female that can sometimes grow hair and teeth. This is almost like the beginning of a human clone. I'm like absolutely hashing this description.
Sure.
We go into a lot more depth in the actual programs, but there is a possibility out there that we have done things, humans have had genetic occurrences that we're just not aware of, I suppose, would be the way. Until we test everybody, we're never going to know exactly what happens. And there's like chimeras that happen, have been noted in humans. So this is where there's full genetic lines in one organism. So there was a boy in Britain who was born and he had mostly his mother's and father's genetic, but his blood was only from his mother.
Wow. The thing with the teeth, etc., is called a teratoma, as in
That's it.
monster, and it's kind of accepted. But with 8 billion humans, something could have happened along the way, and may have been discounted. Like, obviously, you had sex with a male, you're lying, something like that.
But especially when we hear things like the sharks that have had sexual reproduction before and can flip, maybe this actually does happen, not necessarily in humans, but where there is sex, but you still actually clone anyway. So there is a whole heap of detail behind this about how it actually happens, what happens within the sexual cells to actually let this occur. And there's several different ways that it can occur in females. But one thing that I found really strange, and I'm not sure I even understand, is that only females will ever be able to clone themselves because their eggs are the important bit, really. They're the bit that holds the most energy of life, I suppose. And like
Yeah.
I found that to be a real mind blower. Like why can't sperm do it?
Well, it was a big surprise for me when I started in my studies looking at chromosomes, and I was going, we got all these chromosomes, and then at the end, the females have got the XX, and then the males have got the X and the Y. And when you actually physically look at it, with an optical microscope or through an electron microscope or from a DNA point of view, you realize that that last X for the female is a big, robust X, and the Y is just a little fluffy thing, an X with one of the arms chopped off, sort of like the cheap economy model. So women are the ones with the electric windows and the turbochargers and the airbags, and men are the poverty pack version with the simple job of here's some DNA, that's it, over you go, you take care of everything else.
Right. And it's that thing of like the Y chromosome losing genes at quite a rapid rate compared to the other chromosome. And that's quite interesting as well, with the idea put forward by Jenny Graves from La Trobe University in Melbourne, that means that, eventually in 10 million years or something, the Y chromosome will not exist. It will have degraded itself out of existence. But that doesn't mean an end to males. That doesn't mean an end to males because there are creatures out there that have sexes divided by chromosomes, and there are creatures out there that have sexes that are ascertained by temperature, and there are different sorts of chromosome makeups. There's a rodent that lives on an island off Japan that has completely lost the Y chromosome but still has male and females occur. Evolution is not neat, it finds a way. So we often sort of think of it like this machine maybe, but it's not like that at all. It's really messy. And so as the Y chromosome occasionally sheds a little bit that might otherwise not be super important, the bodies or the organism finds a way. And so it doesn't mean that males will go out of existence. And to be fair, 10 million years from now, humans won't be around. So it's nothing to worry about, but it is an interesting concept.
Yeah. So with the one you mentioned about the temperature being the determinator of sex, and I think that there are some turtles. I guess you could say that is what determines the sex of the offspring is not the heat of the moment, but the heat of the after moment.
And it is. It
Wow.
is.
And so you're saying 10 million years. So we humans kind of split off from the chimps about 7 million years ago, and they went down a line of chimpanzees, bonobos, and we went down another line. Now, I tend to be more optimistic about the human race. I reckon we'll be there, but in a vastly modified form, in the sense that with genetic engineering, we can modify ourselves for the future. Which particular podcast should people go to find more about this parthenogenesis? Which podcast, which episode? Can you remember?
Oh, now you're testing me, Carl. It's What the Duck, and I reckon it'd be about episode 6 of the series. We're getting right towards the end where I start questioning why we have sex at all. It gets to that point. We start right at the very beginning of time, and I try and find the very first dick pic that ever existed, the first fossilized penises, and come all the way forward to try and question what sex will be like in the future. And that's where the chromosome questions come in. But within that, like, one of the things that probably made me swear the most, Carl, I have to say, when I was reading the papers was actually about semen. And semen is incredibly complex, way more complex than I suppose I'd ever given it credit for. It's not just the little wrigglers. There's a whole heap of proteins and lipids in there that are sort of like glitter bombs of messages, right, that go inside a female organism and deliver a whole heap of messages to her about what her body should do to enable conception and enable successful reproduction. And this blew my mind.
Can you say that concept again?
So, semen is sort of like a computer virus. So, you open up the email and you think you're just going to get the sperm, but actually, what you're getting is a whole heap of information that actually is messages to a female to switch on a whole heap of things in her body to make her the perfect mother. So they've studied quite a lot of this in fruit flies, and in fruit flies there's different sex proteins that get delivered to the female and make her do things like, for example, her stomach gets bigger so that she can eat more, and the drive to eat goes up, drive to sleep goes down. There's also messages to her body that will make her less likely to want to mate again with a different male. So she has a period where she will not be interested in sex, that it's like completely put on the back burner for her brain. And these lipids, what blew my mind, I never knew this. I wish I had have learnt this earlier when I was a younger woman. These lipids, in some cases, can exit the reproductive system. There are
Wow.
little proteins that bind to neurons, both within the reproductive system of the fruit fly, but externally as well. They can make their way all through the system and control all sorts of things. There was an effect in the fruit fly that the researchers likened to almost jet lag. They basically disrupted her diurnal sort of rhythm to her life to enable her to eat the maximum amount of protein so that she could put the maximum amount of protein into her eggs and have successful young. And so this has been looked at across a range of species, and in every species so far, including invertebrates like lab mice that they've looked at, in every single species, there's anomalous proteins. So, not exactly like what I've described necessarily in the fruit fly, but something along those lines. So, when you are exposed to semen, there are potential impacts on your body as a female that you hitherto might not have been aware of. And when I was reading these papers, I sat up straight in my chair and swore a lot.
Big question, obviously. Is it possible that a similar change of behaviour is mediated in human females after sex with sperm?
Yes, it is. The researchers, Sarah Robertson in Adelaide, has done work on this, and she thinks that almost definitely yes in the work that she is doing. Now, it's really hard to study because it's harder to get females who you can actually test, I suppose, to have females who are abstaining from sex and females who are having sex. And, it's like a very difficult and complicated experiment. But she was saying to me that she was wishing also that she had have known this when she was, a younger woman, and that it also has implications for behaviours that we see in humans, like stealthing. So that's where intercourse is occurring and the person with a penis takes the condom off and exposes the other partner to semen without their knowledge, right? There's implications in this that we never would have known before. This one totally my mind. I was ropeable for days. I was ropeable. Like
Annoyed.
I did not, I was very, very annoyed for
Why weren't
days.
you
But it's
told? Why didn't you get the email? Why didn't they send you a note telling you this when it was relevant, more,
exactly.
right at the beginning of this sexually active post-pubertal thing? Wow. Why wasn't I
Yeah.
told?
But I have a million questions on that, Carl, because like what I don't know is like if males are exposed to semen from another male, from another person who has testicles, what happens there? I have no idea, and I don't think anyone studied it. So, I mean, I'm full of questions in this regard. I just think it's fascinating.
Okay, first thing, this also is in yet another episode of What the Duck, I'm guessing, or Sex is Weird, one of
Yeah,
those.
yeah, it's all in Sex is Weird. We go through a lot of material, I tell you what.
Wow. And then secondly, the head of the penis, the glands, is mucous membraney. So it's not like a hard, relatively impervious membrane. Can there be back information from
Yes.
the vaginal wall through the head of the penis back to the male?
Quite possibly. And there is like a whole heap of reactions in the female that, okay, so because I don't want to come across like I'm just being like anti-semen here, because within females, not in humans, but across the animal kingdom, I suppose, there's a whole heap of reactions that can occur within them when sperm arrives that can be, I suppose, antagonistic towards the sperm in some ways.
Yeah.
You really want to be picky about who you mate with when you're a female, right? You're putting a lot of energy potentially into carrying young or laying eggs. So you really want to be picky. And the ways that female bodies actually achieve this is by doing things like enacting their immune systems so that any
Ah,
wrigglers that aren't quite right actually, like a sort of like a switch gets turned on and those ones get attacked and taken out.
what?
There's a whole heap of mechanisms that can assure that the sperm that does arrive is the right sort they want to actually have children with or young with. And then
Mm,
I'm sure you've come across like some of the more anatomical features of females as well. So, for example, in ducks,
hmm.
with what the duck, many female duck internal sexual anatomy actually has like sort of like blind alleyways and things like that. They have to
Wow.
actually allow a male to enter to actually get really right up close to where the eggs are. And any
Wow.
males that are making attempts to have sex with them that are not welcome can get shunted off into the sideways alley. So they still ejaculate. It's still in the system. There's still a chance that it might make the way through. But they call this a labyrinthine vagina.
Labyrinthine vagina. Love it.
Swirls, little offshoots, places that the penis will get lost unless the female guides it through.
These are in your overall What the Duck Sex is Weird
Sex is
podcast.
weird. Yeah, if you search on ABC Listen or anywhere where there's podcasts for What the Duck, you'll find us there. And Sex is Weird is really clearly labelled. It's like in each of the titles, you'll see it. Sex is weird. Look, I had so much fun making it. It enhanced my view of the world and the complexity around me. And knowing that when I see a daddy longlegs in the corner, some of the sexual behaviors that actually brought that daddy longlegs into being has only, and or flies, the fruit flies, the little midges that are around your fruit bowl, all of these things, it's only enhanced my view that the world is, excuse my language, Carl, but fucking amazing.
Well, it is like, and look, following on from that, as I worked my way through studying various parts of the human body, gradually arose in me the realization that my favorite organ was the uterus, because it starts off as this little thing like a clenched fist or something, grows to the size of a shopping bag with a human inside, and then shrinks down without wrinkles, so I can do it again and again. Mate, what's not to like? So, do you have a favourite organ in all of this, or are you still waiting for it to
I
pop
love
out?
that description. I think penises are really, really interesting because, like the uterus, they're one of the only organs that can literally change shape and form and use and then bounce back.
And in a
Penises
short
can do
period
it
of time.
really, really quickly. In some species, it's like incredibly quick. In seconds, they can have an erection and ejaculate. Some of the duck species, for example, mallard ducks, they have a really quick erection to ejaculation sequence that's quite forceful. It's sort of more hydraulic, press-like, I suppose. Yeah, but I think that that is amazing. And how it manages to go from being a floppy, fleshy thing in mammals, generally,
Yep.
to being a rigid, almost unbreakable thing in a matter of small amount of time is absolutely incredible.
I haven't listened to your series yet, but it's on my next list. So is there a whole episode devoted to that, to the penis?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of penis stuff because, penises, sexual warfare really is what this is about. So the sort of design, I'm using scare quotes there, the design of
Yeah.
penises versus vaginas,
Yeah.
is a gradual process of warfare because essentially males, in biological terms, males want to bonk as much as possible, have as many babies as possible, and
Mhm.
females want to be more choosy because they've got to put more energy into actually producing that offspring. Therefore, that's why you get labyrinthine vaginas, that's why you get hydraulic penises that can ejaculate within 2 seconds of becoming erect, all of these things, penises that have spikes, penises that go in through the sides of females' bodies instead of through sexual organs. It's it's wild out there, Carl.
We haven't even touched upon attraction or pleasure,
Yeah.
but we are coming up towards the end then. So, but give us one big note to go out on.
What is surprising in sexual evolution is how much of it is actually about female choice.
Ah,
Because we often have this idea, like what we've been talking about forced copulation and things like this, that nature is sort of not very pleasant in that regard. But actually, almost all of the things that I consider beautiful in the world are probably, most of them, the product of female choice. Lyrebird song, peacock tails, coloured fish. These are all because the females have decided that that is what is attractive over the course of evolutionary time to mate with. So when the lyrebird partakes in his song and dance, his building of the mound, his mimicry of all of the species, that, though he is obviously the artist in that, the female is the director. She's the one that over time has gone, that's sexy. That's what I want.
oh my God. So, as we finish up then, Dr. Anne, how can people follow you in your fine work? You mentioned just go to podcast land and search for What the Duck, and then
What
off
the
they'll
duck.
go.
Yeah, and off they'll go.
Wow.
Because we've got a new series coming up soon, Carl, and this is where I get experts to accompany me to the movies. We try to see what biological truth can be found in Hollywood. And it
Can you
turns
give us,
out,
yeah?
not much.
Okay, can you give us just a little tease, a little bit more info? You got
Oh,
the
yeah. Well, Groundhog Day. Do
Groundhog
you know
Day
the
where
movie?
he wakes up
Where,
over and over as the same day and he
again,
gradually modifies his behavior until he becomes a better
he grad-
person, that one?
Exactly. That's Groundhog Day is where they pull the groundhog out of, and the groundhog is meant to see if it can see its shadow and predict spring. Well, there's some brilliant scientists in North America that actually have gone through all the groundhog data to see if they actually are very good at predicting weather changes or even stock market rises or falls.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It promises to be lots of fun. Like, I've had so much fun doing this. And what's more, what's been really fun is like getting very serious academics, biologists, archaeologists to sit down and watch movies with me. It's just been a joy.
Okay, look, thank you so much, Dr. Anne, for taking us on this trip through What the Duck Sex is Weird, your fabulous podcast, which I am going to modify my behavior. And as soon as we get off here, I'm going to put it into my list of let's find it and listen to it as part of my routine. Oh, wow. Look, thank you so much, Dr. Anne, for coming on and taking us through this.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Carl. Thanks for having me.
Shirtloads of Science is washed, spun and aired by the University of Sydney.